My name is Marcus, and until 6 months ago, I worked as a security guard at Riverside Shopping Mall in the north end of the city. It's one of those older malls built back in the 1980s, the kind with 2 anchor department stores on each end, a food court in the middle, and about 80 smaller retail shops spread across 2 levels. The mall had seen better days. Half the storefront were empty. The fountains hadn't worked in years, and the whole place had this abandoned feel to it even during business hours. At night, it was worse. I worked the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m., for nights a week. The pay was decent for someone with no college degree, and I didn't mind the solitude. My job was straightforward enough. I do walking patrols every hour, check all the entrances and exits, monitor the security cameras in the control room, and respond to any alarms that went off. Most nights, nothing happened. I'd walk the empty corridors with my flashlight, the beam cutting to the darkness, my footsteps echoing off the tile floors. The mall was always quiet after closing, just the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional creak of the building settling. I actually enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere, or at least I did until what started happening last September. This particular night, it was a Thursday, September 14th. I remember because it was the day after the first cold snap of fall. I clocked in at midnight, relieved the evening guard, and settled into the control room to review the camera feeds. Everything looked normal. Empty corridors, dark storefronts. The parking lot outside completely vacant except for my car and the maintenance van. Around 1:30 a.m., I started my first patrol of the night. I took the east entrance and began walking the lower level, checking doors as I went. Every store was locked up tight, metal security gates pulled down over the entrances. The food court was dark and silent. Chairs stacked on tables, the smell of old grease still hanging in the air. I took the escalator up to the second level. The escalators didn't run at night, so you had to walk up the frozen steps, and they always made this groaning sound under your weight that echoed through the empty space. On the second level, I was checking the doors near the old Sears when I heard something that made me stop. Music, very faint, coming from somewhere deeper in the mall. At first, I thought maybe someone had left a radio on in one of the stores, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it wasn't coming from behind any of the security gates. It was coming from the common area, from one of the open spaces in the mall itself. I followed the sound, walking past darkened storefronts, past the empty kiosks that used the cell phone cases and sunglasses. The music was getting louder. It was old music, something from the 50s or 60s, instrumental, the kind of thing you'd hear in an elevator or a department store. I called out, "Security, is anyone there?" No response, just that music continuing to play. I turned the corner near what used to be a bookstore and saw where the sound was coming from. One of the mall's public seating areas had a bench and some fake plants, and sitting on the bench was an old radio, the kind with the dial and the antenna. It was playing that music, clear as day, even though there was no visible power source, no batteries I could see. I walked over and picked up the radio. It was heavy, solid, definitely vintage. I turned it over looking for batteries or a cord, but there was nothing. The back panel was missing entirely, exposing the internal components, and there were no batteries inside. It was playing music, somehow generating sound with no power source at all. I switched it off. The music stopped immediately. I stood there for a moment, feeling deeply unsettled. I decided to take the radio back to the control room, maybe figure out later how it had been working. As I was walking back, I heard footsteps behind me. Not my footsteps, someone else's, quick and light, like someone running. I spun around and called out again, "This is security. Identify yourself." Nothing. The corridor behind me was empty. I pulled out my radio and called the control room, even though I knew no one else was there. I just wanted to hear my own voice, I guess, To confirm I wasn't losing my mind, I continued back to control room, walking faster now, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. When I got there, I locked the door behind me and set the radio on the desk. I pulled up the camera feeds and started reviewing footage from the second level, trying to see if I could spot anyone else in the mall. The cameras showed nothing, just empty corridors, my own figure walking through them, stopping at the bench, picking up the radio. No one else appeared on any of the feeds. I sat there watching the monitors, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe someone had come in before closing and hidden somewhere, planning to rob a store. Maybe they'd left the radio as a distraction, but that didn't explain how it had been working without power. Around 3 a.m., I forced myself to do another patrol. I couldn't just hide in the control room all night. I took a different route this time, starting on the lower level near the west entrance. Everything seemed normal for the first 15 minutes. I checked doors, tested locks, swept my flashlight across empty spaces. Then I reached the old carousel near the center of the mall. It hadn't operated in years. The horses frozen in mid-gallop, the paint chipped and faded. As I walked past it, the carousel suddenly lurched into motion. Not the smooth rotation it was designed for, but a jerky, stuttering movement, like someone was trying to force it to turn manually. The music box inside started playing that mechanical carnival tune, but warped and slowed down like a recording on dying batteries. I backed away from it, my heart hammering in my chest. The carousel continued its broken rotation for maybe 30 seconds, the horses bobbing up and down in their mechanical rhythm. And then it stopped as suddenly as it had started. Complete silence again. I pulled out my phone and took a video of the carousel, though I don't know what I expected to capture. In the video, you can see the carousel sitting motionless, looking exactly like it had before it moved. No evidence of what I just witnessed. I should have left right then. I should have called my supervisor and told him I was done, but I needed this job, and I didn't want to be the guy who abandoned his post because he got spooked. So I finished the patrol, moving quickly, not lingering anywhere, and returned to control room. The rest of that night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with the mall. When 8 a.m. came and the morning crew started arriving, I mentioned to the manager that the carousel had somehow activated during the night. He looked at me skeptically and said the carousel hadn't power in 3 years, that the electrical had been disconnected when they shut it down. He said I must have imagined it. The next night, I worked with Saturday. I almost called in sick, but I forced myself to show up. The first few hours were quiet. I did my patrols, checked the cameras, tried to stay busy. Around 2 a.m., I was in the control room when I noticed something on one of the monitors. Camera 12, which covered the second level near the old toy store, showed a figure standing in the corridor. I leaned closer to the screen. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing what looked like a dress from decades ago, something with a full skirt and a white collar. She was just standing there in the middle of the corridor, facing the camera, completely motionless. My blood ran cold. There was no way a child should be in the mall at 2 a.m. I grabbed my radio and my flashlight and ran toward that location. It took me maybe 3 minutes to get there, running the whole way. When I reached the spot where I'd seen on the camera, there was no one there. The corridor was empty. I pulled out my radio and called it in, told the dispatcher I'd seen someone on the cameras and needed police assistance. While I waited for them to arrive, I checked every store in that area, every bathroom, every alcove where someone could hide. Nothing. 2 police officers arrived about 20 minutes later. I showed them the camera footage. They watched the monitor showing the little girl standing in the corridor, and then they watched her simply vanish. One frame she was there, the next frame she was gone. No movement, no walking away, just there, and then not there. The officers searched the entire mall with me. We checked every entrance and exit, every storage room and utility closet. We found no sign of forced entry, no indication anyone had been in the building except me. The officers took a report and suggested I might want to have the security system check for glitches. They said the footage could be from an old recording somehow playing back, even though I knew it was live feed. After they left, I sat in the control room staring at the monitors. I pulled up the saved footage from the night the radio had been playing and watched it again. And then I noticed something I had missed before. In the background of one of the shots, barely visible in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam, there was a small figure, a child-sized figure standing in the shadows, watching me. I started going through older footage, recordings from previous nights. I found her in dozens of clips, always in the background, always partially obscured by darkness or distance, always watching. She'd been there for weeks, maybe months, and I'd never noticed. The camera system had been capturing her all along. I quit the next day. I didn't give 2 weeks' notice. I just called my supervisor and told him I wouldn't be coming back. He tried to convince me to stay, said they'd have trouble filling the position, but I was done. I couldn't spend another night in that mall knowing something was there, something that appeared on cameras but couldn't be caught or explained. I found out later that Riverside Mall had been built on the site of an old apartment complex that burned down in 1975. 3 people died in that fire, including a 7-year-old girl named Sarah Chun. I saw her photo in an old newspaper article, and it was her. The same face I'd seen on the security monitor, the same dress style from that era. The mall closed permanently 2 months ago. They said it was due to declining revenue and too many empty storefronts. But I heard from someone who still worked there that the night security kept quitting. Nobody would work there after dark anymore. The building is sitting empty now, waiting to be demolished. Sometimes I drive past that night, and I can see the dark windows, the empty parking lot. And sometimes I think I see a small figure standing near one of the entrances, watching the road, waiting for something. I never stop to look closer. Some things are better left alone. My name is Rachel, and I used to work as a night auditor at the Sunset Motor Lodge, a small motel off Interstate 40 about 30 miles west of the city. It's the kind of place that caters mostly to truckers and people passing through, one of those single-story motels with rooms that open directly to the parking lot. The building is shaped like an L, with the office at the corner and 24 rooms stretching out in 2 wings. It was built sometime in the 1960s and hasn't been updated much since then. Still has the original neon sign out front that flickers and buzzes at night. I worked the night audit shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. The job was simple enough. I'd check in any late arrivals, handle any guest requests, process the day's paperwork, and keep an eye on things. Most nights were quiet. We rarely had more than half the rooms occupied, and most guests were asleep by midnight. I'd sit in the office behind the front desk, watching old movies on my laptop or reading, occasionally dealing with someone who needed extra towels or had a problem with their room. The pay wasn't great, but it was easy work, and I appreciated the solitude. I'm not much of a people person anyway. I'd been working there for about 8 months when things started happening, and it all began in early November of last year. It was a Tuesday night, November 7th. I clocked in at 11 p.m., and the previous shift clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, gave me the rundown. We had 11 rooms occupied that night, all of them quiet guests who'd already checked in and gone to their rooms. Dorothy mentioned that room 7 had a malfunctioning air conditioner, but maintenance would fix it in the morning. She left, and I settled in for what I expected to be an uneventful night. Around 1 a.m., the phone at the front desk rang. I picked it up and said my usual greeting. Sunset Motor Lodge, front desk, How can I help you? There was silence on the other end, just a faint sound of static. I repeated my greeting, but no one responded. After about 10 seconds, the line went dead. I figured it was a wrong number or maybe someone's pocket dial. I went back to my laptop. About 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same thing, silence and static. Then the line going dead. This happened 3 more times over the next hour, always the same pattern. I started getting annoyed. I checked the caller ID display, but it just showed room 7. Room 7 was supposed to be occupied. According to registration, a man named Robert Fields had checked in around 6 p.m. I hadn't seen him myself since I started my shift after he'd already checked in, but his information was in the system. I decided to call the room back to see if maybe there was a problem with his phone line. I dialed room 7, and it rang several times before going to the generic voicemail message. I left a brief message saying I was from the front desk and asking if everything was okay, and to call back if he needed anything. The phone at the desk rang again almost immediately. I picked it up, already knowing what I'd hear. Silence and static. I decided to walk over to room 7 and check on the guest in person. Maybe his phone was malfunctioning and he was trying to reach the desk. I grabbed my master key and stepped outside. The parking lot was quiet, just a few cars scattered in front of occupied rooms. The motel was well lit, with lamps mounted above each door casting pools of yellow light. Room 7 was in the short wing of the L, about halfway down. As I approached, I noticed that the curtains were drawn and there was no light visible from inside. I knocked on the door. "Mr. Fields? This is Rachel from the front desk. I wanted to make sure everything is okay with your room." No response. I knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. Fields? If you need anything, please let me know." Still nothing. I waited for a moment, listening. I couldn't hear any movement inside, no television, no sound at all. I used my master key and opened the door slightly, calling out as I did, "Mr. Fields? I'm entering the room to check on you." I pushed the door open and reached for the light switch. The lights came on, revealing a completely empty room. The bed hadn't been slept in. There were no personal belongings, no luggage, no sign anyone had been there. But according to our records, Robert Field had checked in, paid for the night, and been given the key to room 7. I stood in the doorway, confused. Maybe he'd checked out without telling us, but that didn't explain the phone calls. I walked into the room and checked the bathroom. Empty. The closet. Empty. I picked up the phone receiver and listened. Dead silence. Not even a dial tone. I went back to the office and pulled up the registration information. Robert Fields had paid in cash. No credit card on file. The address he'd given was in a town I'd never heard of, and when I looked it up online, no such town existed. The phone number he'd provided went straight to a disconnected message when I tried calling it. I checked the security camera footage. We had one camera covering the parking lot and the entrance to the office. I rewound to around 6 p.m. when Dorothy said he'd checked in. The footage showed a man approaching the office, entering through the front door, but the quality was poor and I couldn't make out his features clearly. He was just a dark figure in a jacket. Then I watched the footage from after he'd supposedly checked in. He never came back out. There was no recording of him walking to room 7, no footage of him entering the room. It was like he'd entered the office and simply disappeared. I felt a chill run down my spine. I locked the office door and stayed inside for the rest of the night, jumping every time the phone rang, which it did 6 more times before dawn. Always the same thing, silence and static, coming from room 7. When Dorothy came in at 7 a.m. to relieve me, I told her what had happened. She looked concerned and said she'd tell the manager. I asked her what Robert Fields had looked like when he checked in. She paused and then said something that made my stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" Nobody checked into room 7 yesterday. That room has been vacant for 3 days. I showed her the registration in the computer. She stared at the screen, her face going pale. I didn't enter this. I would remember checking someone in. We only had 10 rooms occupied when I left last night, not 11. We both went to room 7 and looked inside. The room was exactly as I'd left it, empty and untouched. Dorothy called the manager, who came in early to review everything. He checked the computer system, looked at the security footage, examined the registration entry. He couldn't explain it. The system showed someone had checked in, but there was no record of who had entered the information, no timestamp, no login associated with the entry. The manager decided to take room 7 out of service temporarily while he investigated. He thought maybe there was a glitch in the computer system or someone was playing a prank. But over the next few nights, strange things kept happening. Room 7's phone would ring at the front desk, always between midnight and 3 a.m., always with just silence and static. I'd see lights turning on and off in room 7, even though it was supposed to be vacant and locked. I'd hear footsteps on the pavement outside the office, walking back and forth in front of room 7. But when I looked outside, no one was there. Other guests started complaining. The people in room 6, right next to room 7, said they heard someone moving around in the adjacent room all night, furniture being dragged, doors opening and closing. But when I checked, room 7 was locked and empty. The guests in room 8 on the other side reported the same thing. I started asking Dorothy and the day shift clerk if they knew anything about room 7's history. The day shift clerk, a guy named Miguel, told me something interesting. He said that about 5 years ago, before any of us worked there, a man had died in room 7. Miguel didn't know all the details, just that the man had checked in alone and had been found dead in the room the next morning. Natural causes, apparently, a heart attack or something similar. Miguel said that since then, room 7 had always been a little strange. Guests would complain about noises or feeling uncomfortable, and the room was harder to rent than others. I looked into it further and found an old newspaper article online. In November 2018, a man named Robert Fields, age 56, had been found deceased in room 7 of the Sunset Motor Lodge. He'd been traveling cross-country and had checked in for one night. The next morning, when housekeeping had come to clean the room, they'd found him dead in the bed. The article said he'd had no known health problems, and his death had been unexpected. An autopsy had determined he died of a heart attack sometime during the night. The dates made my skin crawl. Robert Fields had died on November 7th, 2018. It was now November 7th, 2023, exactly 5 years later, the anniversary of his death. I showed the article to the manager. He went quiet and then admitted he'd been working at the motel when it happened. He remembered it clearly. He said, the trauma of having someone die in one of the rooms, the police investigation, the awkward conversation with the man's family. He said he'd never connected the anniversary to the recent strange occurrences. After that night, things calmed down for a while. The phone calls stopped. The lights in room 7 stayed off. The noises ceased. But exactly 1 month later, on December 7th, all started again. Same pattern. Phone calls from room 7, lights flickering, sounds of movement in the empty room. And it happened again on January 7th and February 7th. Every month on the 7th, room 7 would come alive with activity, as if Robert Fields was checking again, going through the motions of that last night of his life, trapped in some kind of loop he couldn't escape. I quit in March. I couldn't take it anymore. The anxiety of knowing that every month on the 7th, something would happen. The dread. I felt walking past room 7 even on quiet nights. The way the phone would ring and my stomach would drop, knowing what I'd hear on the other end. I got a job at a call center, working day shifts surrounded by people and noise. I sleep better now, though sometimes I still jump when a phone rings unexpectedly. I still think about Robert Fields, about what might have trapped him in that room, in that night, cycling through it over and over. I wonder if he knows he's dead, or if he's just endlessly checking in, going to his room, and never checking out. The Sunset Motor Lodge is still operating. They still have room 7, though I heard they stopped renting it out entirely. It just sits there empty, waiting for the 7th of every month when its occupant returns. My name is Kevin, and I used to work as a custodian at Lincoln High School on the south side of town. It's a large school built in the late 1990s, 3 stories with about 2,000 students during the school year. The building is modern by school standards with wide hallways, lots of windows, and that institutional architecture that makes every high school look the same. I worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday through Friday. The pay was decent with full benefits, and I didn't mind working alone. My job was to clean the entire building, empty trash cans, mop floors, clean bathrooms, wipe down surfaces, and handle any minor maintenance issues that came up. It usually took me the full 8 hours to cover the whole building, working methodically from one end to the other, floor by floor. The school was always empty at night, except for me, just miles of empty corridors and dark classrooms. I'd work with my earbuds in, listening to music or podcasts, and the time would pass quickly enough. I'd been working there for about 3 years when things started happening last spring, and it all centered around the 3rd floor science wing. It was late April, a Thursday night. I was on the 3rd floor around 2 a.m., working my way through the science classrooms. These rooms were always the messiest. Students left lab equipment out, chemicals spilled, papers everywhere. I was cleaning room 312, one of the chemistry labs, when I heard something that made me pause. Singing. Someone was singing very softly, coming from one of the other rooms down the hall. I pulled out my earbuds and listened more carefully. It was a female voice, young, singing something I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe I'd left the computer on in one of the rooms and it was playing a video or something. But as I walked toward the sound, I realized it was too clear, too present to be coming from speakers. The singing was coming from room 318, the biology lab at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but I could see light coming from underneath it. I knocked on the door. Hello? Is someone in there? The school's closed. The singing stopped immediately. The light under the door went out. I tried the handle and it was locked, which was strange because I had already cleaned that room earlier in the night, and I knew I'd left it unlocked. I used my master key and opened the door, flipping on the light switch as I entered. The room was empty. No one was there, but I immediately noticed something wrong. All the chairs in the room, about 30 of them, had been arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the room. When I had cleaned earlier, the chairs had been in their normal positions around the lab tables. Someone had moved them while I was working elsewhere on the floor. I felt a prickle of unease run down my neck. I checked the windows, all locked from the inside. I checked the supply closet at the back of the room. Empty. There was nowhere anyone could have hidden, and no way they could have gotten out of the room without me seeing them in the hallway. I moved the chairs back to their proper positions and left the room, locking it behind me. I radioed the school security office to report a possible intruder, but the security guard on duty, an older man named Frank, checked all the entrance logs and confirmed no one had entered the building since the last teacher had left at 7 p.m. All the doors were still locked from the outside. I finished my shift that night, but I couldn't shake the memory of that voice, that singing, and those chairs arranged in their mysterious circle. The next night when I came in, I made sure to check room 318 first thing. Everything was normal, chairs in their proper places, nothing disturbed. But at 2 a.m., when I was cleaning the third-floor bathrooms, I heard it again, the singing coming from the science wing. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to room 318. The door was closed, light showing underneath. I used my key and pushed it open quickly. The room was empty again, but this time all the lab equipment, the beakers, test tubes, Bunsen burners had been arranged on the center lab table in a neat line, smallest to largest. And on the whiteboard at the front of the room, someone had written in red marker, "Help us remember." My hands were shaking. I took out my phone and took pictures of everything, the equipment arrangement, the message on the board. Then I called Frank and told him to come up to the third floor immediately. He arrived a few minutes later, and I showed him what I'd found. He looked disturbed and said he'd review the security camera footage. We went to the security office together and pulled up the cameras covering the third floor. There was one camera in the main hallway that had a partial view of the door to room 318. We rewound the footage to 2 a.m. and watched. The footage showed me walking past the room earlier during my first pass through the floor. Then nothing for about an hour. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., the light under the door turned on, but no one entered the room. The door never opened. The light just appeared. And then, about 5 minutes later, it went off again. Still no one entering or leaving. Frank said he'd report it to the principal in the morning. But in the meantime, I should just avoid that room for the rest of the night. I agreed, though I spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound, constantly looking over my shoulder. The next morning, the principal called me into his office. He wanted to know exactly what I'd seen and heard. I told him everything, showed him the photos on my phone. He listened quietly and then told me something that made my blood run cold. 15 years ago, in April 2009, there had been an incident at the school. A chemistry experiment in room 318 had gone wrong during an after-school science club meeting. The teacher supervising the club had left the room briefly, and 5 students working on an experiment had been exposed to toxic fumes when they mixed chemicals incorrectly. 3 of the students had died, 2 girls and a boy. The other 2 had survived, but with permanent health problems. The principal showed me an old yearbook. The 3 students who had died were Melissa Torres, age 16, Jennifer Kim, age 15, and David Chen, age 16. He showed me their photos. They were smiling in their yearbook pictures, young faces full of hope, unaware of what was coming. He said that after the accident, room 318 had been completely renovated, all new equipment, new ventilation system, new everything. The school had implemented stricter safety protocols for all science labs. But he admitted that over the years, there had been occasional reports of strange occurrences in that room, lights turning on by themselves, equipment being found moved, and several teachers had reported feeling uncomfortable in the room and requested to teach in different classrooms. I asked him what "help us remember" meant. He looked sad and said that the 3 students who died had been largely forgotten by the school community. It had happened 15 years ago. There was no memorial, no plaque, nothing to acknowledge what had happened. The school had wanted to move past the tragedy, to not dwell on it. But maybe, he said, the students didn't want to be forgotten. After that conversation, something changed in me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt something else, sympathy maybe, or understanding. These weren't malicious presences. They were just kids who died too young, who wanted someone to remember they'd existed. That night when I came in for my shift, I went straight to room 318. I brought a piece of paper and a pen. I wrote down the names of the 3 students, Melissa Torres, Jennifer Kim, David Chun, and underneath I wrote, "You are remembered. You will not be forgotten." I taped the paper to the wall inside the supply closet, where it wouldn't be easily seen, but where it would remain. And then I said out loud to the empty room, "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry you were forgotten, but I remember you now. And I promise I won't forget. The room was silent. I finished cleaning it and moved on with my shift. At 2 a.m., I was on the second floor when I realized I hadn't heard any singing. I went back up to the third floor and walked past room 318. The lights were off. Everything was quiet. I looked in through the window, in the door, in the dim light from the hallway. I could see the chairs were all in their proper positions. Nothing had been moved. And standing near the windows, barely visible in the darkness, I saw 3 figures. 3 young people, teenagers, standing together. They weren't detailed enough for me to make out faces, just silhouettes. But I knew who they were. They stood there for maybe 5 seconds, and then they faded away, dissolving like morning mist when the sun hits it, and they never appeared again. I worked at Lincoln High School for another year after that before taking a better job at the district office. In that whole year, nothing else strange ever happened in room 318. No more singing, no more moved furniture, no more mysterious messages. Just a quiet classroom like any other. Before I left, I worked with the principal to establish a small memorial in the school's main hallway. A plaque with the names of Melissa Torres, Jennifer Kim, and David Chun, acknowledging their deaths and memorializing their 2 short lives. The school holds a small ceremony every April to remember them. I think that's what they wanted all along. Not to frighten anyone, not to cause trouble, just to be remembered, to know that their lives mattered, that their loss meant something, that they weren't just forgotten victims of a tragic accident buried in the school's past. Sometimes I drive past Lincoln High School and I think about those 3 kids. I hope they're at peace now. I hope they know they're remembered. And I hope wherever they are, they finally found what they were looking for.